to the front, and you can talk to any one of us wearing the light blue shirts about joining. It's a free coalition. We've been working hard, most recently on the bond program, which you'll hear about some of the funding that we got allocated to affordable housing. And then now we're looking ahead to other reforms. Dallas is currently working on a land use plan that we're advocating for called Forward Dallas. So we look forward to sharing more about ourselves, sharing some information that our experts will be getting into. And Jennifer has a land acknowledgement, and I believe want to take care of that and then talk about the housing justice movement.
So as always, one thing Rayo likes to do is recognize the space that we are in, what has brought us here, our ancestors and ourselves to be in this moment. And this land acknowledgement was co-created with Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation and Lavender Cypress. Rayo acknowledges that today's event is being held on ancestral and stolen land of indigenous tribes, including the Tomahawk, Wichita, and Kickapow people. We recognize that this land has nurtured joy, tradition, and community for these indigenous tribes who experienced genocide and forced removal by European colonizers. We also acknowledge that indigenous people and communities are still here. We honor the work and resiliency of these indigenous educators, community members, and elders that continue to care for the land and all the life that it sustains. We recognize that we're here today by efforts supported by Native indigenous communities, including education, preservation, and advocacy. We also acknowledge the indigenous people of Africa who were enslaved and forced to labor, building the economic foundation of Dallas and the country, which now often systematically excludes their descendants. The migration of immigrants and refugees to Dallas is rooted in settler colonial practices by the U.S., displacing these people from their indigenous lands. Their contributions have profoundly shaped and enriched our community, economy, and culture as valued friends, neighbors, and fellow builders of our shared future. We recognize the significance of this collective history and our part in it today. This land generously provides us with the gifts of a place to live, work, and play. Reflecting on its abundance and how we can reciprocate this generosity, we are called to reflect on our responsibilities to the well-being of both the land and its people. With all of this in mind, let us intentionally move forward with the well-being of the land and its people as our focus. I always get the shows reading that too. So it's a hard transition. But the housing justice movement, as you can see here today, is part of a bigger picture. It's a collective of folks, including Builders of Hope, right? Dallas Housing Coalition, and many others, where we're trying to ensure that Forward Dallas, which is rooted in land, and the North Star of how the city should change with the land perspective, we want to make sure that it's done so in a very inclusive way, with a fair housing focus. We can't just put one housing strategy and assume it's going to work equally throughout the city, because as we read in the land acknowledgement, place matters, context matters, history matters. And so this kicks off our very first step of engagement to get into that narrative and ensure that specifically our most vulnerable communities, we uplift their voice. And so this evening I'm really excited with our distinguished guests and moderators to hear more about the work that they've been doing, so that way we have a level set and understand what are the numbers, what is the data saying, right? And that will kick us off to a series of other events, education opportunities that we hope you all can engage and take part on. So welcome, and really excited to have every single one of you here today, and if you're also joining virtually as well.
Awesome, thank you. So now my honor to introduce our panel today. First, our moderator for the evening is Billy Lane. Billy is the Executive Director of the South Dallas Fair Park Intercity Development Corporation, a steering committee member of the Dallas Housing Coalition, and that offers programs focused on homeownership and economic and community development in South Dallas. Billy holds a master's degree in liberal studies from SMU with a focus on human rights and social justice. He's also the senior pastor of the campus of United Methodist Church. Please join me in welcoming Billy Lane to the first recording area. Next up, I'd like to introduce Lisa Neergaard. Lisa is the Associate Director of Planning at bcWorkshop, where she heads policy and community capacity building initiatives. In June 2023, BC published a report detailing the state of Dallas housing, a 5-year comparison from 2016 to 2021, and more recently this year released another report titled +1 Housing, on how to add housing housing to existing single-family lots and neighborhoods. Lisa has accumulated much experience in planning and policy over the years, having worked in the lower Rio Grande Valley with the Land Use Bologna, Housing Action, United for RGB, and Rapido. Welcome, Lisa. Next up, our second panelist, Cullum Clark, Director of the SMU Economic Growth Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute. Cullum is an adjunct professor at SMU where he teaches a course titled Topics in Economic History. Additionally, he fulfills his academic position in a research capacity with a focus in macroeconomic policy, economic geography, urban economics, and modern economic history. Cullum founded the Cullum Clark Company, a Dallas-based family investment company where he previously acted as president and currently acts as senior advisor. Thanks, Cullum, for being here. And last but not least, Ashley Flores is our final panelist today. Ashley is the Chief of Housing at the Child Poverty Action Lab, a nonprofit committed to cutting child poverty in half within 20 years. In her role, Ashley leads transformative systems-level projects to ensure that all families have access to housing that is healthy and safe, affordable, stable, and in a thriving community. Prior to CPAL, Ashley was an education strategist at HKS, a global architecture firm, where she worked to elevate the importance of the built environment for K-12 district and higher education clients. She also serves as Director of Planning and Special Projects at Dallas ISD and championed and operationalized the district's work in innovative school design and personalized learning, as well as low-performing school turnaround. Ashley earned degrees in business administration and liberal arts from the University of Texas at Austin and in education policy management from the Harvard School of Education. Thank you so much, Ashley. Appreciate all of y'all being up here. Really, I'll turn it over to you to lead our discussion.
All right. So thank you, Brian, and again, on behalf of the Dallas Housing Coalition, I want to thank each of you who are here. Let me get a sound check. How loud do I need to be? How loud do we need it? Okay. We have microphones, so we'll thank you, Stephanie. We'll do our best to project. So let me just say, as I get started, I have some questions here that have been beautifully crafted by the Housing Coalition and some of our partners. I appreciate that. I'm going to stick with that. But let me just say, having the opportunity to sit next to 3 researchers, I mean, for me, this is like Luca, Kyrie, and Derek Lively. I mean, I'm just sitting next to some beasts, man. So I appreciate their work. And anytime I have the opportunity to read their work, listen to them, I avail myself. So they just don't lie. So let's go ahead and get started. And where we want to start this afternoon, and let me make sure we're going to end up in the right place. Brian, toward the end, there's a place for questions from the audience.
That's correct.
So probably you can go ahead and be preparing those because there will be time for you to ask your questions. Now, I'm just going to move my chair just a little bit so you don't think I'm going to be talking about anything. so I'm just going to fade that one, you know who the experts are. All right. So this afternoon, we will begin. We're going to hear your assessments of the current housing market in the city of Dallas in your capacity as researchers, academics, and community leaders. So we're going to start with Ashley Flores. Ashley, what were some key findings from Child Poverty Action Lab's 2023 Rental Housing Needs Assessment? Key findings.
So before I touch on the key findings, I think it's important to set the stage with why CPAL was interested in a rental housing needs assessment in the first place. For years, we've been hearing, we need more housing. We hear from residents, we hear from policymakers, business leaders, that affordable housing is one of our biggest issues and challenges in the city, but we didn't really have, we had that broad problem statement, but we didn't have more specific, actionable problem statements beneath that. So when we say we need more housing, we hadn't yet answered questions completely like, well, how much housing? Affordable at what income levels? Where does the housing need to be located? How large do the unit sizes need to be to accommodate different household needs? So what we wanted to do was to take that big, broad problem statement of we need more housing and break it down into more specific, actionable problem statements that we can begin to think about how do we collectively design solutions for. So CPAL partnered with economic development firm HRNA to do a rental housing needs assessment just for the city of Dallas. for low-income renters. We simply don't have enough housing stock that is priced affordably for our lowest income renters in the city. So put another way, there were 70 affordable rental units for every 100 households at or below 50% area median income. When we dug into that a bit more, we found that the gap is particularly acute for larger household sizes, so think our families in the city. We found that for households that are at or below 50% area median income that have 4 or more people in their household, we made an assumption that they might be looking for a 3-bedroom rental. And when we were looking at then the difference between supply and demand of affordable 3-bedroom rentals and those larger household sizes, we found we only have about half of what we need in the rental market. We have about 50 affordable units for every 100 of those larger households that are looking for slightly larger rental units. A couple other key points I'll mention. We were also interested in how that gap might change over time. We have this kind of big staggering gap now. We were wondering, well, what will this look like 5-10 years down the line? So we built a model to forecast where we might be headed by 2030, assuming that we're maintaining our patterns of production of units coming offline. But then we also looked at anticipated demographic shifts, change in job and wage mix to determine where we might be in 2030. And what we found in our forecast was that we stand to go from a gap of around 34,000 units at or below 50% AMI today to a gap of nearly 84,000 units by 2030 for our low-income renters. So a huge jump in the gap between our current data and our future data. And what we think will drive that big jump in the gap is the loss of what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. So rental housing that doesn't have any specific income restriction, it doesn't have a government subsidy, but it is affordable in the rental market. It's priced in such a way to be affordable to a low-income renter. It can be for any number of reasons. One might be it's older housing stock and it hasn't been updated, so the price is sort of filtered down over time. Maybe it's a kind of substandard quality, so it's priced lower because of that. But that naturally occurring affordable housing stock is definitely at risk in the coming years. The last thing that I'll mention before I can go on all day, but I'll cut myself off. We know that particular renter groups are extra vulnerable to these gaps in supply and demand in the rental market. So across the city of Dallas, when we look at the entire population of renters, regardless of income, 48% of renters citywide are what we call housing cost burden, meaning they're spending more than 30% of their income on rent, which is kind of a commonly accepted budget threshold for what you should be spending on your housing expense. So again, that's almost 1 in 2 renters, regardless of income across the city, are overspending on housing. But when we looked at certain populations of renters, we found disproportionality. So senior renters, for example, if you're a senior and you're renting, 55% of our senior renters are housing cost burden. If you're a black renter, 55% of black renters are housing cost burden. If you're a single parent with a child, 74% of our single parents with kids are housing cost burden, meaning they're spending over that 30% threshold for rent. So we know that the rental market is challenging everywhere, but it's particularly challenging for low-income renters and then for certain populations within our larger city.
Good. Thank you, Ashley. Okay. Lisa. We did not do that. Based on bcWorkshop's State of Dallas Housing 5-year comparison report released last year, can you tell us how income disparities and housing inequality have evolved between 2016 and 2021?
Yeah, so as you had mentioned, we released a report. We started doing the State of Dallas Housing in 2016, and so we wanted to check back in and see how things have changed. And I think the biggest thing that we found in terms of that shift was, incomes have risen, particularly in the southern sector, which was really encouraging, right? But the cost of housing had also risen, and it had risen at a much higher rate. So any gains households or individuals had made were basically kind of obliterated by the cost of housing. So you aren't seeing that kind of movement forward that we kind of hope is going to happen with rises in income. And I think the next big thing, and I think of this as a disparity issue, is that we saw a pretty strong, I would call it housing to household or mismatch. So not to be, I'm going to try to make it be as simple as possible. So based on the number of people in a household, we looked at that and said, okay, based on that number, we assume you would need a house or some sort of housing that had this number of bedrooms. So based on that, we actually saw, that our one-person households was probably the most aligned in the city, that there's basically a 1-to-1 for every one-person household. There is a studio or one-bedroom apartment. We are way overstocked. So, interesting to, you just heard from Ashley that larger family households have a harder time finding affordable rent. We actually have an overabundance of 3- and 4-bedroom houses for the number of households that actually align with that number of bedrooms. So what that means is we either have seniors that are, couples or individuals that are in the house because they're aging in place, like we told them they probably, would be good for them. But that means they're not kind of transitioning out of a larger house and maybe, making that house available to a younger family. We also have more single person or couples buying 3- and 4-bedroom homes, either because that's the easiest thing to buy because we don't have a lot of condos or for sale multifamily or kind of even smaller townhomes. Most of the townhomes that are being built are still 3- and 4 bedrooms. So what's being built, even new, is not necessarily matching kind of the household needs in terms of size. And that contributes to people paying more for housing, particularly if they want to become homeowners, because that's what is available. So I think that was some of the biggest issues was those pieces.
Right. And now that, Cullum, we come to you and get what Ashley and Lisa are saying has got me thinking about the economics of this. And so from what you have seen in your research at the Bush Institute, what pre-existing policies surrounding land use appear to contribute to an increasingly smaller supply of affordable housing units?
Good question. So, Dr. Lane, Brian, the Dallas Housing Coalition, I'm really honored to be here with this panel and doing this event. And I'm a think tank economist. I do a lot of writing and speaking, but a lot of people here in the room, they do a lot of doing on the Dallas housing front, and you have my respect and admiration. It's a lot of hard work. I guess first thing to say is I feel kind of bad. I'm not quite a senior, but I am one of those people kind of aging in place, and now we're empty nesters, so it's a good point. I'm not able to persuade my wife at that point. But we'll see.
No judgment, it's just a reality.
So I do very strongly agree with everything Lisa and Ashley have said, so let me try to add something around the edges and kind of back into your point about policy. I promise I'll do that. So I'm an economist, so I'm going to talk about supply and demand, okay? So I'm doing a big research project right now that will have a lot of data on cities all over America, metropolitan areas, the city of Dallas, city of Fort Worth, a lot of suburban municipalities around here and elsewhere. So a lot of comparative data, okay? I'm running kind of the following calculation, and I'll see the results. We have a pretty good idea, based on loads of experience, of what are the factors that cause demand for housing in a place to increase really fast, or not so fast, okay? And so one thing we're doing in this report is using a kind of quantitative model to predict what we expect the growth in the demand for housing and different kinds of housing to be in Dallas, just like Ashley and CPAL have done. In comparative perspective, Dallas and Plano and Frisco and Fort Worth and Austin and a couple hundred other places. And then looking at, well, to what degree do the actual measurable supply growth quite strong. So the question is, how is Dallas performing relative to this? So let me tell you a good news, bad news story. And the bad news just might, well, it probably isn't going to shock this group. I know it's a knowledgeable group, but let me at least start with the good news. On the whole, if you take going back to 2010, which is when most of our data starts, the city of Dallas, we'll talk about the metro area, I don't want to ask about it again. City of Dallas, the demand growth has been respectable. It's been faster in the suburbs. And on the whole, let me take one step back. I'm going to compare Dallas to roughly 25 other core big cities in Sunbelt metropolitan areas of Austin, Fort Worth, Houston, Atlanta, so the most comparable places in America. Relative to all those most comparable places, our performance has been kind of average since 2010. Okay, it's like we're very middle. Okay, and what is the result of that for the price level? Well, actually, if you go back to 2010, we actually had a little bit better affordability on average than those 25 odd other places. And if you come forward to today, for people who are roughly at the median, we're still roughly average relative to those places. Okay, so that's the good news. Okay, now we need to do bad news. One thing we did, which is not overlaps nicely with what Lisa's done, going back to 2016, is we take the period 2010 to 2023 and break it into the first half and the second half. Here's the kind of bottom line. Overall development of multifamily real estate in the cities, all these comparable cities, accelerated a lot from the first period to the second period. The first period was a period of really historic underdevelopment of housing in American cities, a profound underdevelopment. The second half of the period, from 2016-17 to the present, was a period of underbuilding, but not nearly so awful. Okay, we accelerated things in America, but we didn't really accelerate things in the city of Dallas. Okay, but here's the worst thing. There's a company called Yardi Matrix that has data on the multifamily markets all over the United States, including down to neighborhood levels and so on. And they also have segments of the market. So they have overall apartments, but they also have what they call mid-range, and they have what they call fully affordable. Okay, so fully affordable, subsidized, rent stabilized in some fashion or another. So what can we say about fully affordable? Dallas, actually back in 2010, had more than the average of these 25 other cities by a little ways. But we underbuilt in the first half of that period. Okay? But here's the really shocking thing. Yardi Matrix's data, 2016 to the present. The number of multifamily units that are fully affordable that were built in the city of Dallas, according to their perhaps incomplete data, is 744. It's shockingly low. It's so far below all the other 25 cities, it's almost hard to believe how we possibly could have literally taken what was a kind of an engine of developing affordable housing that wasn't great, but it was kind of limping along, and somehow it just went kaput, fell apart. And so what is the result of that? Well, if we look at the price that is, one thing we have in the data set, we don't just look at the overall price, we look at the price paid by people at different points in the income distribution. And if we look at people who are moderate to lower income in our city, go back to 2010, we look kind of average for how burdened such families were in the city of Dallas. We run it forward, we've so messed up the supply side in recent years that now our low to moderate income families are more burdened than the average Sunbelt city. So we took a hole and we dug a deeper hole for ourselves. So I'll back into a very simple statement about policy. Something went seriously wrong around the middle part of the last decade. It wasn't great beforehand. The whole system of how we develop affordable housing in America is a complicated beast that a lot of y'all probably know a fair bit about. The one bottom line we can all say is maybe LifeTech is kind of a good idea. Maybe Section 8 housing choice vouchers are more or less a good idea. But you just do the math. There's not remotely enough money coming from the federal government to solve other than a relatively small fraction of the problem. That's just an American phenomenon. But something unique happened in Dallas around the middle part of the last decade. And I've gone on kind of for a while, but Pastor Lane, if you want me to talk about that along the way here, I will.
Give me a sentence about what happened.
I think there is a common perception by people involved in trying to actually construct affordable housing in Dallas that the city became impossible. My friends who work in the low-income housing tax credit funded part of the multifamily development industry who do nothing else will generally say, we've given up. We've taken our business to some of the more middle income suburban cities nearby or further afield, such as the Austin area, which is good enough. I think maybe I'm only going to quote other people who are closer to the situation that I would respect, but I think a plausible explanation is we had the distinctive Dallas shock of the Supreme Court fair housing case. And out of that came a fear, maybe a justified fear, maybe an appropriate response, but a fear that crippled us. And that was the fear that building more affordable housing in areas that are currently relatively low income concentrates poverty and is not constitutionally acceptable. It got the city in trouble, and it will just keep on getting us in trouble. And so the city council decided in 2018, comprehensive housing policy, decided in theory two things. We're not going to build any more affordable housing in areas that are currently relatively low income, and we are going to go build 20,000 units over 3 years, which was a preposterous number, but at least it was nice to put a big number out there. Only in areas that are relatively high opportunity as defined by a study of that time. But the latter was a completely infeasible thing to do. So as a practical matter, the city of Dallas announced to the world, for all practical purposes, we're going to stop all new affordable housing development in areas where we might feasibly achieve it, and we're really just going to kind of hope and pray about these other areas. But as a practical matter, I mean, I said at the time to someone in the media, some city councilman got really angry at me, like, this just isn't going to happen. Like, you've got to build where you can to some degree, and then keep on chipping away at the tougher areas. That's just the way it is. It's a hard business. And so I think that in effect we decided to shut it down, and staff made very clear that was the pressure they were under from the council. And so I think we have a lot of rebuilding to do.
Can I add a little bit to that? I think also the state entity that assigned or that judged tax credits also changed their rules around the same time. So I think there was also quite a few years where Dallas submitted a LIHTC project in more opportunity areas, or actually in areas that were not quite as opportunity, and they didn't get the points. They didn't get awarded the tax credit because they weren't in low poverty areas.
So an additional shock.
Yeah. So like the state, it was both a coordinated piece of the state and the city. But again, I think it was all responding to the Supreme Court case, and also responding, I think, from like community pressure of this, feeling like they were the Southern Sector being the place that all affordable housing goes, because it was the place that all affordable housing went for much of Dallas's history.
Can I say an understandable reaction,
Totally.
but ultimately a disastrous one?
Ashley, let's come back to you. What could the lack of housing supply and consequent lack of opportunity mean for children and family outcomes?
Well, we know that housing affordability deeply matters for kids and families. When housing is unaffordable, whether that's your rent or your mortgage, or the families are really stretching their budget to pay the rent or the mortgage, that means they're making really difficult trade-offs. Maybe they're sacrificing the nutritious produce that they want to buy at the grocery store. Maybe they're foregoing preventative health care appointments just to keep a roof over their head. And so we know that the impact of those trade-offs are felt both by the parents and the kids. For parents, there is unsurprisingly significant stress that rate. The same is true also for our higher ed students. So we did another project with Dallas College where we looked at students enrolled at Dallas College who had an eviction filed against them while they were enrolled at Dallas College. And this will probably not be surprising, but for students who had an eviction filed against them while they were enrolled, only 4% went on to earn their credential from Dallas College, compared to 30% of their peer cohort that didn't have an eviction filed against them. It's kind of common sense, right? If you are losing your home, you're scrambling to find a place to live, you're struck with all these financial barriers, of course, finishing your education is going to be deprioritized. It's going to be very difficult to come back and re-enroll and get back on your feet. So the impact is tremendous on parents, young kids, older students, everyone is impacted.
Cullum,
Yes.
in the past, what attempts have been made to increase, kind of touched on this a little bit, housing supply in Dallas? Also, were there any barriers you have observed to such attempts? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you don't mind, just kind of
I think I've noted what probably was the biggest barrier of the last 6 or so years. I've just added additional complexity that was strewn in the way. If we take the long view, I think we have to recognize, okay, here's a really big picture story that I think comes from national economists like Ed Glazer, authors like Chuck Marone that bring a lot about this. We've always had problems. Poverty has always been with us, and it's probably from the dawn of time been a constant issue that has always been a substantial part of the population here in every city who were underhoused to some degree or another. I think the affordable housing problems that we face today are they're a continuation of that, but a relatively newer vintage. Okay, I'll promise but when I say they're a relatively newer vintage, it wasn't that long ago. Like, I was born in 1966. Back then in Dallas, we had a lot of problems in Dallas. We had got a lot of historic tragedies and injustices we certainly had not come to terms with. But we had kind of a lot of raw land. And we had a very, very growth-oriented approach, like the policy approach was pedal to the metal build. That's how the city worked in those days. It's what the business community wanted. So there was land to build on, a will to build. Land was a heck of a lot cheaper then relative to people's incomes, okay, in much of the city. But not saying we didn't have problems, we had significant problems. We had a giant legacy from redlining and Jim Crow and all of the other injustices that went on in the city and in our country. But it was of a different nature. What the authors that I mentioned have described is in the course of, let's say, getting going in the 80s, accelerating in the 90s, and going completely berserk in the 00s, okay, we made it drastically harder to build more housing. Drastically harder on many, many levels. And that includes things that you could actually find in the code, okay? It also included, and I'll defer to Lisa more about how to actually build in 3 dimensions than I do. I don't know very much about that. But it's definitely there in the code. Numerous economists have shown this through close studies of the actual building code, the permitting process in many cities across America, just how much harder it got. I think also we had a real shift in how our governance works, and we largely created a system of government in this city that empowered 14, in effect, single district dictators to block anything in their district. Very, very, very rarely overridden by their colleagues. And, we elected a lot of good people. Probably elected some people that you all aren't big fans of. But we can't say it was primarily a problem of electing the wrong people. I think we have to say it was the structure we put in. And the structure became really, not by design, but by result, extremely good at vetoing all kinds of new housing development. And it just plainly got a lot harder, as any developer could assure you. So when I'm talking about efforts to address this, you have to really talk about the efforts that have been set in motion since it got a lot harder. And I think that there what you've had is we're a small government city. We have a local government that's over time tried to use the tools that are available to them, the 2 big federal money streams, LIHTC and Section 8 housing choice vouchers. You've had a pretty wonderful nonprofit community. CHODOs in the past, community housing development organizations, we have Habitat for Humanity, Ashley, the CEO, is here, built quite a few really nice units in West Dallas and elsewhere. I mean, we've had no shortage of smart, motivated people trying to tackle the problem at the best scale they could. And I think that in general, the city government kind of wanted to make it work as well. So let's say we probably turned the available dollars into new affordable housing about as well as you can reasonably hope to do, given the availability of the dollars and the extreme difficulty facing them. So I think there are plenty of good efforts over time, but I think we have to really, I don't want to be repetitive, but I think we have to really take a hard look at how does the wheels came off the train literally just in the last 6 to 7 years.
Let me ask you, this may be an unfair question, but I'm just thinking
Oh,
what
no,
you said.
make it into it.
Do we have enough land
Enough is a strong word.
for the supply that is?
My two colleagues may know more than me. I think isn't there something like a number like 90,000 acres?
I think the city of Dallas is the most
Yeah.
undeveloped land that you guys
Of all big cities, New York, the city of Dallas has more undeveloped land than the city of New York or the city of LA, despite there being several times larger. So I don't know about enough. A lot. There is a lot.
Good enough.
You know, I think if you wanted to understand the challenges of turning that city-owned land or other public agency-owned land, such as DART-owned land, into housing, it would be good to maybe look at I don't mean to speak up for any one political leader, but get Councilman Chad West's weekly thing that he distributes, because he's got kind of a running commentary about some of these challenges, and you'll see just week after week after week, like endless frustration from this one particular city council person who's trying to actually extract more information in the beginnings of a plan for what to do with that giant public sector owned land portfolio, and it just kind of doesn't come. So for whatever reason, we're just not well set up to turn that land, which is maybe controlled by numerous agencies and numerous departments, into affordable housing, which would involve engaging a whole different set of players to come in, and it just seems to be beyond us at this moment. So there's a heck of a lot of land. One other thing I'd like to mention is that also on the council agenda is the idea of minimum lot size rules. So the land that is available for residential could turn into more housing units with that simple reform. They did it in Houston, arguably the most comparable big city in America. And numerous studies have looked at what happened in Houston, and it's interesting. If you talk about how many single-family lots that were kind of larger became like smaller lots and multiple units, it's actually a pretty tiny fraction of all the lots in Houston. So good news for anyone who's worried about their neighborhood totally changing character, but bad news for anyone who thinks it's going to turn into a whole lot of units. But the biggest addition to the units that they got was in repurposed commercial and industrial land. If they could demolish the old use, turn it into residential, and build 4 times more units on it, that turned into something like 20 or 30,000 units in Houston. That's a pretty good start on Ashley's number. So we can do a lot better on that front.
Okay. And speaking of that, Lisa, bcWorkshop also released a +1 housing report, somewhat like what Clark just said. What housing needs did you all observe in Dallas, and how can additional residential density and tighter-knit community design help address these needs?
Yeah, so +1 housing, really simply, is just the idea of like what would happen, or how do you go about putting one additional unit on existing single-family lots. And so what we were trying to look at is, in addition to like when you're talking about like raw land, there's also a really large number of vacant infill housing or infill lots across the city. And these are some of the hardest. These are actually some of the hardest to build on, because you typically have to update infrastructure, which means if you're investing that much, you also potentially need to build something larger and more expensive to recoup your costs. And they're going primarily in kind of modest or lower income neighborhoods. So now you have a house that is like just astronomically different in terms of style, size, and cost from the existing neighborhood. And one thing that we really respect and believe in neighborhoods. And so because of that, we also recognize that not every lot and every neighborhood is going to be all multifamily, and that multifamily is not the only product that we need to build to deliver housing. And so, how do we potentially achieve, get more units on the ground, still provide, a affordable homeownership option, and then also kind of build within existing neighborhoods, honoring some of that character. Because what we don't believe is that neighborhoods have to be single family to be neighborhoods, right? So you can put 2 or 3 dwelling units on an existing single family lot, have it kind of look and feel the same as the existing neighborhood. Both of those things can be achieved. So we looked at kind of both from a number standpoint, but also a design standpoint of how you go into different types of neighborhoods. So we looked at, kind of more traditional, like Junia's Heights, but also like Preston Hollow, which is, typically much larger homes. And so how do we look at the different types of neighborhoods that we have, and what does it look like to deliver a, single family house and an ADU, or accessory dwelling unit, as many people call it. So that could be potentially a rental unit, or as our families are now changing, how did that become either a house for a college graduate that maybe has come home, or a family member, or elder mom and dad, or how do you build a duplex that looks just like a single family house on an existing single family house. And that would allow, depending on how you plot the land, that could be a homeowner that now is renting out the other side. And so what I find interesting about this proposal is that in many ways, this already happens in many, what I would say, modest communities anyway, whether they turn their garage into an apartment without letting anyone know, or they built a back house. And so these are things that are already happening, but allowing for it to happen within the code, within our zoning, not only encourages it, but also makes it easier to do, and allows you to get financing for it. And and potentially, if more of this is happening, it gets easier to buy something buy a duplex, and the fund, and the financer, the people that are giving you the loan, may, start to look at the rent that you might acquire and put that into could you actually qualify for this slightly larger house? Those things don't happen now because there aren't a lot of comps for it. It's amazing what happens when there isn't something that you can point to say, I can do this, or this is already happening. And so the more that we do it, the more it becomes kind of a standard practice. So that was really the goal of the +1, is how do we deliver more units within our existing single-family neighborhoods that have land, many of them, and particularly when we talk about, higher income or low poverty areas of opportunity, those areas are going to be the strongest to fight against any form of multifamily change in zoning. But they are also some of the ones that are, when I look at the variance requests, it's actually higher representation of higher income areas are asking for ADUs. And they're either doing it for family, or they're mostly doing it for family. And so it's not as though this concept of an additional unit is, counter to those property owners. I think the way that we have done zoning that is predominantly focused on use and hasn't included some level of design guidelines. And this is a little bit different than some of the code issues, because I think some of the code issues actually prohibit quality design because it wants you to build a larger alleyway if it's a multifamily versus a single family. There are a lot of, you can't do shared parking if it's a single family and a multifamily. So there's a lot of dynamics of what we would consider kind of a blended neighborhood in terms of single family and multifamily or small scale or mid-density, whatever name you want to call it, right? There are a lot of issues within our like building code that are wholly separate from our zoning. If you look at our zoning, the planners have actually, in Dallas, even though we don't necessarily recognize it, have actually given us quite a few options. There is clustered housing, which allows for a minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet, which is what Jack West is asking for, that already exists in our zoning code. There's a whole slew of form-based zones that give us a variety of building types that we can provide, build. But frankly, nobody's asking for those zoning types. There are very few areas in Dallas that have any form-based code. South Dallas actually has some of those, a handful of those areas. But by and large, we have underutilized them. And they were created when the last comprehensive plan was adopted.
You call those form-based codes?
Form-based codes. We have a whole section in our code called form-based districts. And nobody uses them. I mean, not nobody. They do exist in some places, but by and large, people are not. It is easier for a developer to ask for a planned development district where they can basically write their own zoning than it is for them to choose one of these other options. And so I think until we kind of limit the ability for a developer to just write their own zoning code, we're not going to see the utilization of these other things, because they're going to write the zoning that fits with their pro forma, which is what their bank signed off on, but doesn't necessarily meet or deliver kind of our larger city goals of maybe smaller unit sizes on less land, and so on and so forth. They're really going to go for the lowest common denominator in terms of market, particularly in the for sale market, right? I think that's where that most of what our report was focused on. So, yeah.
Very important. I'm gonna skip down here because we want to have a chance
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and we want to give our audience a chance. So what examples? And each of you kind of mentioned some examples, but examples from other cities similar to Dallas, tackling housing shortage and affordability. What examples appear to have been successful in addressing inequitable housing trends? I know within the coalition, we talk a lot about Austin, what Austin's doing, but just mention some, anyone.
I think it's important to say that there's no one solution, which is part of the challenge. I think it would be great if we could on a silver platter say, here's the one thing we need to do to solve all of our housing woes, but it's really a constellation of strategies, both on the rental side and on the homeownership side. So one quick example that comes to mind, and I use this because it's my husband's hometown and he's very proud of this, but my husband's from Minneapolis. They, a couple of years back, I think 2020, early COVID, they have a new policy around upzoning. So I believe all their single family lots, I can't remember if it's only vacant or any, but can be upzoned to have up to 3 units, I believe. 100%. Every one. So currently built and vacant lots, where every parcel can be upzoned to have support up to 3 units on the lot, which lots of other cities have done as a way to bring in, kind of some soft density. It's mostly for those infill lots to give the option of a few more units. So that's one I'll throw out as an example.
Let me give maybe two buckets of groups. Maybe the more expected and the slightly surprising, right? So I mentioned to you all that I've, particularly in the studies I'm doing lately, published maybe end of the year, focused on big Sunbelt cities and metropolitan areas like us. So within that group, and I said Dallas is kind of an average performer overall and a below average performer on affordable housing over the last 6 or 7 years. Someone's got to be an outperformer. So ones that are outperformers, actually in the actual core city, Denver has actually been an outperformer with a whole lot of demand growth, a lot of challenges. We were in a meeting there, everyone would be saying it's pretty darn tough in Denver, but if you actually look at the numbers, they've been a bit of an outperformer. Raleigh, North Carolina, Nashville, there are places that are just really giant building sites. Believe it or not, to a greater degree than Dallas. So there are a handful. We'll outline a lot in our report. So there's a lot to be learned. All of the no nirvana, but there are a lot of places that are performing reasonably well in this metric or that metric. And then the more surprising group that's maybe closer to home is some of the fastest growing suburban cities in Texas. And I know it's easy to dismiss them and say, like, well, totally different circumstances. It's all just sprawl and, single-family homes on big lots building out to the Oklahoma border and so on. But actually, that's really that's an obsolete image of what is actually happening in a number of these places. And if you actually look at the places in our data set that hugely outperform relative to even the very fast demand growth, they are in fact, they're Frisco and Rockwall, and they're a number of other McKinney, and there are also a number of suburban areas outside Austin and outside Houston. The best environments in the United States to build new housing. And what are they building? Well, actually, they're building a pretty wide range of housing types. The number of multifamily going up in them hugely outperforms a whole lot of core cities, including here lately. They're also building job centers, so they're not building a future of monster commutes. On the contrary, one bit of data we look at is simple ratio. How many people work in a place each day divided by how many people, working adults, go to sleep at night in that place. It's a very simple ratio. Well, quite a few of the very fastest growing suburban places, they haven't quite caught up to the core cities like City of Dallas, City of Fort Worth, City of Austin, but they're gaining really, really fast. Because they're actually building a whole range of property types, including mixed-use centers with a whole lot of, commercial type space and office space. Even though office is in trouble, nonetheless, some of these places is still more or less filling up. So I think there are lessons all around. And in general, I think what's common to those suburban places, they really want to grow, and they have really, really well-oiled machines in terms of their local governments, like the permitting engine. Super predictable, super fast, and they know what they want to create. And that does include not a small number of fully affordable units, the way Guardian Matrix has.
So we want to open it up to our audience to appreciate. First of all, can we give them a hand? Can anybody say go Mavs? Better. All right. Let's open it up to our audience. Brian, would you mind? Because it's kind of hard to see. You kind of kick people out.
Yep. Sure. Back row, and I'll come up front.
So just kind of lightning round of question to clarify the really awesome array of facts everyone's dropped. So really well done putting this all together. So real quick, it was mentioned, did I hear this right? So Ashley, did you say that eviction among Dallas College students who got evicted midterm or during the school year, they had a graduation rate of 4%? Is that what you said?
So for Dallas College students, we matched the student records of Dallas College students, and I say we had really amazing partners at Dallas College who actually did the work, and I'm there being a white. So they matched the student records of Dallas College students to our eviction filing database. So evictions that have been filed in Dallas County from 2017 to 2022 to find students who had had an eviction filed against them while they were enrolled at Dallas College. And what we found is that for students who had an eviction filed against them while they were enrolled at any time in the school year, if they had an eviction filed against them while they were enrolled, only 4% of that group of students went on to complete their credential to get their degree.
And just so that I know, because that's an incredible number, 4%. What's the typical graduation? Like, what's the graduation for Dallas College in general?
Their peer cohort was 30%, correct?
So similar socioeconomic.
We didn't control for demographic data like that, but their sort of peer cohort at the campus at Dallas College at the same time without an eviction in that 2017 to
could you explain, or maybe it's just confirming for me, what do you mean by we have it and nobody uses it? Like, what is it that now City Code has?
So, we have kind of standard, what, it's a terrible name, but Euclidean zone, which focuses on use. Your R5, your R7, your multifamily, we have that. And then in addition, about 15 or so years ago, Dallas adopted a series of form-based districts. So walkable mixed use, 3 and 5 and 12, there's a whole series of them. And so they are options. If you are changing your zoning, you could pick from a standard Euclidean use-based zone, like multifamily, 4 or 3, or you could pick mixed use 3, which is you can have a mix of housing types and it be 3 stories tall, which is basically what the 3 means. So it's an option, but by and large, it is not selected, or people do not choose that to move forward with that option when they're changing the zoning. By and large, planned development districts, out for like larger developments, is the most popular option.
Okay, so when you talk about form-based code, you don't mean it like the way in Japan they have like the entire table. They don't have the same. Their table doesn't line up with ours. When you talk about we have form-based code, you're talking about the MU1 and MU2 designations.
No, MU1 and 2 is a Euclidean zone. Is one of the 4 use-based. So this is like the form-based districts focus mostly on the form of the building and less on the use. And so you could have a single family next to a duplex, next to a 3 to 5 unit, next to a single family, as long as they, but your max height is 3 stories in an area.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Hexel. Ashley.
Hey, Cullum.
Yes.
It's great shout out. When you're talking about how the fastest growing suburban cities are doing affordability better, the thinking behind that, my thinking behind that is that they're newer, right? They're not dealing with some of the historical neighborhoods that are pushing back against this change in single family zoning because it's always been this way and don't ruin our neighborhoods. Is that fair to think that that's why they're being more successful and they're able to plan ahead with some of the work that they're doing?
Everyone here asked this question? Can't prove it, but I believe the answer on the whole is yes. I think kind of an uncomfortable truth about all of this, in my judgment, is that it's just truly a lot easier to build what you or I or any others in the room might wish to build on your painting on a blank canvas than to remake a neighborhood already in place, already filled with people. Just a lot easier, and that shows up in the results all over America. I guess what follows is what are the lessons for Dallas, right? The city of Dallas. I think the lessons are the following. I think that we can talk until long past all of us are gone about how to convince people to not take a not in my backyard attitude, to treat it as a kind of moral defect and ask them to change. But I'm not optimistic that it'll happen in my lifetime. That humans will radically change their notion about the place that the surrounding neighborhood where they live. I'm inclined to treat it as a part of the landscape, a challenge to work around and maybe to persuade a few at the margin rather than to blast through it and create something entirely new. The good news in Dallas, we already talked about the available land, right? So if you think city-owned land, DART-owned land, the ISD-owned land, how about I just learned that, I'm so embarrassed to not have learned this until very recently, but the term YIGBY, you know this one, Pastor? Yes, in God's backyard. Really a lot of land owned by religious institutions.
I should interject here. At CPAL, we've looked at vacant parcels that are owned by faith-based
I learned it from you.
organizations. Is that, okay, good. And there are thousands of parcels in the county that are owned by religiously affiliated organizations, churches, and other that is sitting vacant. We obviously need to learn more about the intent for that land, but another option.
And I also think if the city could really pull it together and develop a strategy, among other things, it would involve quite a lot of rezoning of return without a subsidy, that would be a sensible choice for the city of Dallas, in my judgment. So when you add it all up, if you basically try to, paint on a blank canvas by creating a canvas here and a canvas there, we're a really big city, there's a lot of canvases to paint on, as opposed to try to remake fully, which I fully respect everything Lisa's saying about one more in neighborhoods where already exist. I hope a fair bit of that happens. I also suggest find a blank canvases and start painting.
So Britton?
I have a question. So it seems like, I don't know if this is the case, it seems like a lot of affordable housing, or housing that, is, even if it's not specifically designated, it is still affordable, gets tucked away, way out away from everything else, or just along highways or other really busy corridors. There's all kinds of health implications, etc. And we don't see much infill housing. We don't see a lot of infill housing in general. But just in the U.S., there doesn't seem to be a lot of examples of affordable or social, housing in the kind of tight-knit communities. I mean, is there any real work going into changing that here in North Texas and other, of our suburban neighbors or other places in the U.S.?
There's actually a new, I believe, there's a new development actually, that is surrounded by single-family houses. That is a multi-family development. I think it's 2 stories tall. So I mean, it does happen. It just doesn't happen. Doesn't happen a lot. Mostly again because the margins to build new affordable housing is so tight that typically land cost is the biggest factor. And so, the cheapest land is typically along highways. It's not, like it's the undesirable land. And so, if we're gonna, I don't know, I might be stepping on a limb, but it feels like if we're gonna stop affordable housing from being built there, we need to stop any housing from being built there. And so, I think it's potentially setting new standards for where housing can be built, particularly as it relates to environmental hazards, highways, industrial plants, that sort of thing. So, but if we don't do that, we're going to continue to see affordable or lower cost housing in those places because it's the only way to make the dollars work. Is the unfortunate because the level of subsidy that goes into affordable housing declines every single year.
Can I add something that's you could say the better located location as opposed to the remote of the highway kind of thing. We haven't really talked about it except for when Ashley got started about the naturally occurring affordable housing and the likelihood that how many are going to go out of existence?
About 54,000.
That's a pretty huge and devastating number. The thing I just like to put out there, if we wanted to create more opportunities for more people across more of the income distribution to live in, in areas that are relatively adjacent to workplaces, reasonably well located, I think there's a lot to be said for a lot of new, bold strategizing about buy, rehab, and make permanently available existing units. And let me just do I'm an economist, I like math, so I just a very quick math exercise, right? So if you have a certain number of dollars available, which we do, thanks to Brian and the bond package, and if you have a certain amount of LIHTC money that is possibly obtainable, so if you got a certain number of dollars, you want to stretch them as far as you can, right? I just want to point out something that it may be obvious to everyone, but it's just sort of bears saying, I think, which is, okay, a family at wherever you like in the income distribution, 50% of the area median income, let's say, can afford a certain amount. It's not zero that they can afford, they can afford a certain amount. The market will actually, like people seeking a profit would actually be willing to own that place up to a certain price, okay? So if you want to subsidize, you only have to cover the difference between that and the cost of either acquiring and rehabbing or buying or building, right? Well, I'm not sure everyone has their own numbers, but I know I was looking up like what does it cost to build affordable housing in Dallas these days? So I asked Lee to tell me. But I know there was a new development in Mesquite where they had kind of a lot of units. It's $260,000 a unit. I looked around Zillow and found all kinds of homes, many of them close to here, that could be purchased, single-family homes that could be purchased for like 150, 160. I think actually a whole lot of older apartment buildings, garden apartment buildings, the cost per unit to buy now would be less. The condition wouldn't be great, but I would posit, even though I don't know how to build anything, like Lisa, that you could buy rehab and still keep it under $200,000 a unit on a great swath of real estate that is well located, reasonably well located in Dallas. If a family could afford, if it can actually work economically up to, say, I don't know, $150,000, well, the difference between subsidizing, from 150 to maybe high 100s versus 150 to 263 or 300 is huge. It expands how far you stretch those dollars by like 4 or 5x. So I just hope everyone would think about that. Like, if we can just figure out how to assemble funds and buy in good locations, we're going to get a lot more appetite for us.
We have a couple more.
Yeah, so in regards to kind of going back to a couple of questions in regards to you folks had mentioned, it's other cities, other municipalities are a little bit better run when it comes to permit services. How is the training and the staffing with the city of Dallas in regards to that as well? Because I think, in my opinion, I think that has a lot to do with it as well too, the training and the staffing that the city has in regards to that.
Y'all know that?
I'm not sure what the city's training practice is. It's a good question.
I can only say what you all know who Will Lundinger is, who went appointed by Mayor Johnson to kind of be like a senior consultant to the permitting office for a kind of an extended period. And I remember talking to him about it, and what he said is, they're actually, he put it in like Army terms, there's a whole lot of great like privates and sergeants and lieutenants all through the system that actually, like that, the office has a lot of good people who actually are pretty well trained. It's kind of a system thing. It's not to pick on the individual, but it's kind of not well run. It's processes. But maybe it isn't about the training. It's about someone reimagining, like from a blank sheet of paper, how would you build this?
And I will also say, coming to that point, or to this like larger issue, the city is also going through a code revision process right now, where they're like culling, particularly their building code, to find the things that don't match. Like that's actually some of the things that is the most frustrating. Is like there are rules that contradict each other, because if you have a code that's been revised for the last and basically the mid 50s, we had the same code that we adopted like in the mid 50s, and then we just revised it piecemeal by piecemeal, right? And so things don't always match, and so you have a lot of people making kind of like their own interpretations. I think that's also where some of this comes in, is that if you had like a cleaner code that connected on all parts, again, if you have a lot of chapters and a lot of departments, and you're talking about building and fire and transportation and environmental, and like they all have to match, and they don't necessarily. So hopefully, again, this is like a wishful thinking kind of situation, with that cleanup, and then also with the adoption of, potentially new zoning districts, or cleaning up of our current zoning districts, maybe we might start to see some of those things iron out a little bit on their own without training. Like, if people don't have to make, judgment decisions on every single project, that's better.
The last question. I know you were first early on.
So one really quick question. You said there might be a shortage of 8,000 housing units in 2030 or so for the lowest income.
That's right.
Is any part of that increasing squeeze due to just the poverty rate going up in Dallas, or the increasing concentration of low-income families in Dallas compared to other places in the region?
Something we didn't, it's a great question. I think something we didn't get a chance to talk about is wages, which are part of the function of housing affordability. And we look at wages in the DFW Metro in our report, and what we found is that DFW has a pretty high number of lower wage occupations, hundreds of thousands of folks in positions like administration or administrative assistant, clerks, transportation and materials moving, food service and prep, sales. When we put together the report, we looked at those top 4 occupations, and the median wages for all 4 of those were right around $40,000. So child and you're looking for a rental, and then that's not even taking into account if you're trying to find a place close to your job or close to your child's school. So I think it's a point, well, but good question. We haven't necessarily seen like a run up in poverty. In fact, we've seen Dallas has seen more of a decline relative to national peers, which is great. But it's just that when you've got sort of that high numbers of lower wage jobs, it's harder to make ends meet in a rental market, particularly if you're in a single income household.
That's about our time. If y'all have questions, our experts will be around here to address them. We have a few closing announcements that we wanted to share with you all before we head out for the day. Please join me again in thanking Billy, Lisa, and Cullum for telling y'all, and you all, the audience members, give yourselves a big pat on the back for taking time out. We do want to leave you with an action step. We mentioned earlier, Forward Dallas is currently under development. There's a huge housing justice point behind this and fair housing, which we'll be talking about our next panel on June 25th. So if you would take some time to scan this QR code and think about submitting a comment to our city plan commissioners. They're reviewing a plan called Forward Dallas, which would accommodate more housing throughout the city of Dallas. Many of the housing types that Lisa and Cullum and Ashley were talking about that are needed are currently not allowed based on the visionary documents for the city of Dallas, which is what Forward Dallas is. It's an update of a plan from 2006. So you can imagine all this change in that time period that needs some support to get Dallas in a better position to grow as more people are moving here, as we're trying to maintain our residents who do already live here. This is a quick action step that you can take. We'll send these slides out to everybody as you left your emails with us when you checked in or when you registered through Eventbrite. So you can go back and look at this. There's some sample language for you to consider. And we really appreciate y'all going online and letting the City Plan Commission, who makes many of these decisions, know that you support a more inclusive Dallas, one that accommodates housing for all income levels, all stages of life. It's sorely needed in our city. Much of our information on Dallas Housing Coalition can be found online, dallashousingcoalition.com. There are a couple of web pages or one-pagers, as well as our website and social media that you can look up more information about us. I will let Jennifer talk about Rayo and the event on the 25th.
Yeah, so again, thank you all for all the panelists and our moderator, you all here in the room, and Brian collaborating with Rayo Planning. They shared, this is just a kickoff of a fun summer. It's a hot one. A fun one indeed. So we do have a panel coming up here soon, and we also are going to be doing a series of walking tours in Oak Cliff, and then right now we're brainstorming going up north as well. And it's also an opportunity to continue the conversation on the streets and literally look and walk these neighborhoods and have that informative conversation. And to wrap it all up, we are going to host a festival here in Oak Cliff on August 3rd, the first Saturday of the month from 6 to 10. So pencil that in, tab it in your mental note. But as Brian shared, we do have your contact information. If we don't, please do share it with the folks up here at the front desk. That way we're able to keep you informed about the different types of engagements and activities, as well as, Brian shared when it's time to go and rally at City Hall. Because that's also something that y'all are going to host in August, right?
Yep, not August, September. We're continuing to build more momentum around housing. Conversations like this keep housing a priority. Thank you to Jake Henninger's here from the Chad West office. I don't know if there are any other elected officials or representatives in the room, but I appreciate you coming tonight, and all y'all for coming out. Hope to see you again soon. We'll leave this QR code up. Feel free to ask us any questions or take a picture with our panelists, and let you guys have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.